Hello there, this is the BSSS e-content. My name is Piyush Pradhan and I'm here with the topic of translation. What is translation? Why translation is coined as one of the most tough form of the job, especially for the translators of the world. It's not an easy cup of tea for any layman to translate. So we are going to look through these different slides, what exactly is translation and how to go about it. Let us just begin. Translation. Translation of the text. We are looking at that process of interpretation of the text that is simply taken from a source language to a target language, and the meaning is further transferred to make some sense to the outside world. There are, in fact, diverse mediums of translations which are available in the world, and those translations work through certain existing networks. Pointedly, the work of a translation is broadly performed through machine learning, which in fact is the easiest and most affordable form of doing about the text understanding, compared with the use of manpower, which in fact is very expensive and unaffordable, because for every word some extra is being charged, which makes it very, very expensive. Because it's not just a question of some handful of words, but we are dealing with the structure of the text. In this part of the third slide, we are going to talk about the types of translations which are based on the text type of divisions. The first is a legal translation, used in the court and law, etc. Then comes the technical translation, taken up by the technical individuals. Then we have got medical translation. For instance, we can cite the example of a medical transcriptionist. Then we have got, and when we look through the commerce point of view, we have got these finance and other sort of things which have got a very technical and typical type of text. So only an expert is required for such translation. Then if I have to specially look at the localization of the translation, which can be taken up by even a common man, we find that it can be previewed even by a layman very easily, without any difficulty. Then we are pushing along to the marketing translation, which requires a quick form of text translation. And finally, the specified certification of the text, which needs to be translated as per only the specific availability of the language text. Hope my audiences have understood how to take up these stuff. Now, the step-by-step procedure to understand translation. First is the target language, which is a language being translated into another. Source language, the language in which it is being translated from. Then comes the meaning transformation, in where we have got the message A that needs to be communicated to message B. And lastly, written form of the text sort of translation. In this form, the text that has been interpreted is often merely confused while it is translated to. So this fourth part is a bit tricky kind of text translation. Let's push along to another slide. Features of translation theory. We're going to look at certain concepts of understanding the translation and how it is taken up as per the translation theory. we can see that there is a clear-cut inclusions of concepts in translation. Then these concepts actually act as true and essential building blocks. Now further, you have to understand that the text should adjust and adapt to the perfect sense of the text. And finally, the definite birth of translation studies account automatically for a translation that needs to be born. So, hope you have all understood the features of translation theory. In order to have clear understanding of translation, first try to build a very solid and sound groundwork with your available studies in hand, and try to establish also an academic discipline that should be used for encompassing the proper translation from the source language to the target language, so that you can understand the whole lot of workload of these kind of studies taken essentially for the translation purposes. Now, I've got certain distinctions or distinction features of translations. We're going to look at and understand the differences between Eastern world and Western world. Now, if we look at the fundamental translation distinctions, the appearances profoundly changes, and at the same time it becomes very difficult because we cannot compare the Eastern translation text with the Western translation text. There should be a yawning gap between these different and the use of these texts. Then we are looking at the literal use of the translation, which is taken as per the meter phrase of the text, which is to, in fact, make you all understand by word for word translation. Now the live example of transcreations. Please read out this section which I'm trying to highlight right now. If we take the example of films or books in different countries, occasionally the director is able to change the title seemingly unrelated to the original one. Why? Because it should have an impact on the audience immediately. This is the reason why. And the translators often create their own text and choose completely their different titles for various other reasons. It can be for the amount of the length, it can be for the catchiness of the picture title, or it should be for the overall appropriateness, etc. And when I go for the paraphrasing kind of translation, we see that there is a sense for sense sort of translation. So I hope my audiences have understood the different distinctions of the translations done. Now let's move on to another slide. This part of the slide is a little bit difficult and tricky. It's because sometimes some of the translators of the world believe that there should be an indistinguishable use of the translation, and that should be completely different from authentic text. Now, there are many other individuals who feel that translators' invisibility hurts the profession in which they work and even takes something unique away from the reader. You say, yes, to an extent, they are correct. Now, we are going to look at the kind of the age-old translation, which is always debated with new transformed version of the translations. We are going to look at these translations which are debated over fidelity and the transparency of such translations of the text. Much of the translation can be explained as an interplay of the two ideas. Please focus on this feature. And others prefer to follow the source text very religiously. So every time you are thinking that you have got the expertise and you can take up the translation job, try to take the source text very religiously before it needs to be converted into target language. Now, Subcategorical contains of translation. We're going to look at the translation services in this particular slide. In order to contrast the pragmatic division of a more theoretical and linguistic approach, for new terms, we have got some introductions to. First is, of course, intralingual translation. Second is interlingual translation. And third, intersemiotic translation. First talks about the translations of the verbal signs into other signs of the same language. The second one talks about or feeds in the verbal signs into other signs of a different language. And the semiotic part of the translation features the involvement of the verbal signs into non-verbal signs. We've got some sample examples of music, film, etc. These are in fact the brainchildren of a famous linguist whose concepts tremendously impacted the translation world. Now for my audiences, this is Hindi to English translation and English to Hindi as a vice versa features. I'm going to have this practice set of this translation, which is going to be tough to make out. Read out these 5 English lines of translation, exactly translated into Hindi. The next part of the practice set. This will talk about the intermediate use of the translation. This is slightly mild than the tougher translation. As you can see, again, there is an English translated exactly to Hindi, word to word. And lastly, the standard translation, which each one of us, like the common individuals, take up in our professional careers. Now you can even understand through this standard form of the translation that I have not used any typical Hindi literature words. In fact, the words which are translated exactly into Hindi are very simple to comprehend. Anyone can understand the feature. Read out very carefully and try to understand that. Now, finally, I have reached to a stage where I'm going to give my audiences some task tests. For my audience, I have 2 different tasks. First, of course, involving the English translation, and second, indeed, Hindi that needs to be translated into English. Thank you so much, and please don't forget to share your comments. In my previous videos, I have made my audiences to please share their comments and like the video at the same time. We'll be delighted to come in touch with you in the future again. Goodbye to you and Godspeed.